my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I have another book talk video to share with you guys. And today we are talking about The Book of M by Peng Shephard. I picked this book up just because I saw it. I hadn't heard anything about it, but I saw it on the shelf. I liked the blues and the blacks on the covers. That made me pick it up and read the blurb. Because sometimes you do judge a book by its cover, at least initially, right? It's what grabs our attention. So I read the blurb, found it interesting, and here we are. So this book I actually started a while ago, back in July, and then if you saw last week's book talk video where I talk about Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, I talk about how when I was away, I wanted a lighter read to read like on the airplane, so I picked up the Eleanor Oliphant book. And I put this one down just because it was heavier. There was more to it, and that's just not what I wanted at that time. But then when I got home, I picked it back up and finished it. And this book is so good. It's not the genre I would normally read. It's kind of a dystopian novel, which is something that seems to really be the popular choice for young adult authors, but this is not a young adult book at all. And this is probably the first dystopian adult fiction I've ever read. Hi, Shannon from the future here. I wasn't thinking at all. That's not true what I just said. I've read some adult dystopian novels before. Goodbye. But it was so unique. The idea is so unique. So first of all, let's just talk a minute about Peng Shephard, the author herself. The writing for this is so good. It's mature and it's confident and it knows exactly what it's doing. And then when I Googled her, because I wanted to know a bit more about her, I found out that this is her debut novel, and I was absolutely shocked because it doesn't come across as a debut novel. It comes across as somebody who is in it and has been in it for years and years. But then when you look at the author photo in the back, she's quite young. And I love that. I love that this book exists. I love it. So let's get a bit into the plot. Sometimes with my book talk videos, I kind of do a walkthrough of the whole novel, and I don't know that I can with this because there's so many layers and there's so many characters, and I don't know if we have the time, but we'll just get started and see where we end up. So, one day in India, in a spice market in Mumbai, I believe, a man named Himu Joshi is at the market and he loses his shadow. It's there 1 minute and it's gone. So first of all, we sort of start off with this Peter Pan-esque shadow problem. If you remember from Peter Pan, he had shadow problems. So this man, Himu, he loses his shadow. And what begins to happen after is he begins to lose his memory. Not all at once, but little pieces here and there begin to just leave him. And we begin to understand that memories are stored in the shadow. So right off the bat, I'm hooked. Like, what's going to happen? Where are the shadows going? Why are they going there? What's going on? And I was in it right from the get-go. So when doing a little bit of research afterwards, I found out that no shadow day is a real thing that happens in India. And because the sun is right up above, I think it's either 1 or 2 days, and the sun is directly up above, so there's no shadow cast. The only way to see your shadow is if you jump. And I hope I'm getting all that info right, but I'm pretty sure that's what I read. So I think Peng sort of got the inspiration from that and went from there. So it starts off in India, but then it starts to spread. It goes to other countries, and then eventually it makes its way to America. And that's kind of where we meet our first two characters that we're going to be spending a lot of time with, and that is Orlando, Ori, and his wife, Max. They are attending a wedding of their two good friends. So they're sort of staying at a resort kind of in the middle of nowhere when it first arrives in America. and they're watching on the news, and widespread panic starts to break out. As you can imagine, if today something like that were to happen, not even like that, but if something were to arrive, some sort of disease or epidemic like that, chaos would break out. On the news, they're hearing about all the people that are losing their shadows. They're hearing about how like the airports are shutting down. Nobody knows what's causing it. Nobody knows if it's contagious or if it's random or what's happening. So we have Orlando and Max, or Ori and Max, and they're at this resort with their friends, and they're like, okay, we're not gonna leave, which is tough for some of the people. Well, a lot of them are there in couples to attend the wedding. One of the girls, she's there without her husband and daughter. She just traveled to come to the wedding on her own because of different circumstances. So she's there alone, and so of course she desperately wants to get out of there and get to her child, but it's too dangerous at that time to leave. So they're there for days and days. They're going through the food. After a while, people start leaving, going to search and see what's going on in the nearby towns. Some decide to break off. It goes on until eventually it's just Max and Ori left at the resort. And two of their other friends that were sort of the last to leave are a couple named Paul and Emmanuel. And they wanted Ori and Max to go with them, and Max was all for it, but Ori said, no, it's too dangerous. Like, if other people want to go and risk it, they can, but we're not leaving. So they're left behind, and every so often Ori will go out and try to find food and whatnot, and bring it back. And then one day Max loses her shadow. And they're both kind of knocked over by it, they don't know what to do. Ori's terrified that he's going to lose her, and even the little things, like Ori's afraid one day she'll wake up, not remember where she is, and wander off, some way, somehow something bad's going to happen. And then on the other hand, Max feels terrible, and she doesn't want to have to put Ori through watching her slowly lose her memories and then lose herself. Because this is a really interesting thing too that happens, and it's as you're losing your memories, weird things are starting to happen in the world. For example, say if you forget that horses can't fly, in the world around you, horses will begin to fly because you can't remember that they shouldn't be able to. Or say if you forget that fish don't have legs, they swim in the water, they don't walk on the land. If you forget that, the fish will be able to walk on the land. And even more terrifyingly, say if Max is there with Ori and one day she forgets him, she forgets that he ever existed, then he will cease existing. So there's also all these just weird, crazy things that are happening. So that's Max and Ori. Then we also meet a girl named Naz, and she's not from America. She's in America going to university in Boston on an archery scholarship. And she's at her dorms when everything begins. And for the first few days, she's talking to her mom and her sister on the phone every day. She's talking to them, and it's sort of giving her a bit of comfort because they're very far away back in their home country. And, she's talking to them, and she's telling them, it'll be okay. Don't worry. And the one thing she insists, she says to her sister, she says, you cannot come here. I don't care that you don't want me to be alone, that you don't want me to be without family. You can't come here. It's not safe. And she makes her sister promise her that she will not leave. So months pass, and the phone goes dead because eventually the power goes out in all across America. The power's just out. And she loses contact with her parents, and she's very lonely. She's very alone. She's very scared. She's sort of just hiding out in the dorms. Everyone else has left. Months pass, about 2 months pass, and one day she looks out her window and she sees her sister there. And at first she's kind of like, oh, it's another hallucination because of hunger and dehydration. She's been having these hallucinations and often seeing her sister because, you know, that's someone closest to her heart and she just sees her sometimes. But then she realizes, no, her sister's actually there. And she's furious at first because she did not want her sister coming here to this sort of kind of chaos. But you know how sisters are. They're not going to leave you alone in the middle of nowhere and wait to die. So that's Naz and her sister Rojan. Then we meet another character, and his name is the Amnesiac. And he's called that because he doesn't have this afflictions. When we get to his first part of the book, it's kind of before this all happened, slightly before. So he's known as the Amnesiac because he was in a car accident and he lost his memory. He has RA, or retrograde amnesia. So he can remember the things that are happening now, but he can't remember before. And he's working with doctors, and they tell him the name he used to have, but he's like, that doesn't connect with me. Please don't call me that. So first the doctors start calling him, you know, the patient or whatever, but eventually they kind of come to the Amnesiac. He likes the sound of that. So as they're working on helping him regain his memory, time passes, and then we're led to the point where the first man in India, Himu, loses his memory. And so the Amnesiac, who's in America with his doctor, they decide to fly over to India once they hear that Himu is losing his memory. The doctor's thinking, you know, maybe they could study him and try to find out how and why he's losing his memory. So they bring the Amnesiac with him because he's thinking, okay, I've developed a close relationship with this patient, and maybe having someone who has suffered similar, they think is similar, they don't know yet that it's completely different, but who has suffered memory loss and is, you know, growing and regaining some of it a little bit, might make Himu feel more comfortable, and he could talk to the patient instead of the doctors. So they go over, and the Amnesiac meets with Himu, and they develop a very, very strong relationship. But then one day something really strange happens, and the Amnesiac is trying to help Himu remember what happened when he lost his memory. And he just mentions in passing, you know, you were in the spice market. And then moments later, the doctors come rushing in, and there's this huge catastrophe. Everyone's freaking out. And the Amnesiac realizes, and well, is told that the spice market has just disappeared. And they don't know why, and they can't figure it out, but they know whatever's happening here is dangerous. And so the doctor and the Amnesiac sort of get sent out of India. They're like, you can't be here anymore, you have to go. Before they leave, Himu had mentioned that the price of losing your memories, you know, it was a steep price to pay, but that you got something in return. And what you got in return was magic. And so the Amnesiac's kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like, he didn't really understand. And then the thing with the spice market happens. And so they have to leave. But while they had been there, Himu taught the Amnesiac a lot about myths and legends from India. And so he learned a lot. And he takes all that knowledge with him, not knowing he'll ever need it. But later on in the book, it comes in very handy. But the final thing before before the Amnesiac goes back to America and leaves Himu, is the Amnesiac asks, you know, he's hungry and he's tired, and he asks for, he calls it at first a peanut jelly sandwich, you know, like the Americans have. And so the Amnesiac's kind of like, oh, you mean a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? So to the Amnesiac, it seems like a very simple request. So he brings it to Himu, and they leave. And then later they get word that Himu died because he was allergic to peanuts but had forgotten. And so then from there, it just kind of rotates through back and forth from Ori and Max, Naz and her sister Rojan, and then the Amnesiac, who later earns the title The One Who Gathers. And so that's what his chapters are called. For Ori and Max, shortly after Max loses her memory, she decides that she's going to leave. She decides that she can't stay with Ori any longer because it's too hard. It's too hard for him. And for all she knows, one day she'll forget him, but see him, get scared and kill him or hurt him in some way. And she decides it's just best for now if she leave. So she takes a tape recorder with her and she records messages to him while she's traveling alone. And she's trying to find other people, find out if there's a cure, things like that. And so she travels and travels, and she eventually meets up with another group of people. And that group of people is headed to New Orleans because word has gotten out that the one who gathers, the amnesiac, is there. And that he's rebuilding New Orleans, and that there's a city there. And the people who still have their the shadowed, and the shadowless are all welcome there. Anyone who wants to remember is welcome there. And they hear that the one who gathers has a way to help. So Max joins these people and they start making their way to New Orleans. Meanwhile, once Ori finds out that Max is gone, he is, of course, devastated, and he immediately leaves and starts trying to find her, and he is tracking her. The first place he goes is back to DC, where they used to live, but DC is pretty much leveled. It's just a heap of rubble, but along with that, there's also a lot of dangerous people there. But while he's there, he finds a group to join, and they are also headed to New Orleans. Ori's people are mostly still shadowed, whereas the people Max finds are mostly shadowless. And so they're both kind of going on their journeys separately, but headed in the same direction. Then we have Naz, of course, and her sister Rojan. They hit the road shortly after Rojan arrives, and they meet a lot of people as well, some good-hearted, some not so good-hearted, and eventually Rojan gets shot with an arrow and she dies, unfortunately. And then Naz keeps going and she ends up joining Ori's group, which are the ones who are shadowed, who are headed to New Orleans. And from there, there's just a lot of things that happen. So many things. This video is already so long, so there's just not enough time to get into all of them. But 1, 2, 3. So for those of you who want to read this book, and I highly recommend it, even if dystopian novels aren't really your thing, they're not my thing, but I loved this. It's long. It's almost 500 pages. I think it's about 100 pages too long is my only real critique. It was long, and I felt like some of the battle scenes could have been taken out and it still would have carried the same weight, but they're in there. So but it's really good, and the characters are beautiful and they'll break your heart. And it's just so well written. Like I said, there's a maturity and a confidence that this book and this story has that just blew my mind, that this is her first novel, and I can't wait to see what comes next for Peng Shephard. So if you do not want any spoilers, now's the time to X on out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. So for the rest of you who are curious as to how this ends, like I said, there's too much to get into all the ins and outs, but I will tell you the ending in case you're wondering what happens to Ori and Max, because that's kind of the story, like, will he ever find her, you know? So Ori makes it to New Orleans and he finds the one who gathers, and he helps build up the city, and he's kind of come to terms with the fact that he's never going to see Max again. So the one who gathers, he begins to find a way to reattach shadows to people who have lost them. But the thing is, it's not necessarily their own shadows. He finds a way to attach shadows to people. And he can use things like books or other items with shadows and sort of place that shadow onto a person. This is so hard to describe without reading it, but he finds a way to attach that onto a person so that they won't necessarily have their own memories back, but they'll have a shadow and a way to store memories going forward. So, you know, they won't get back what they lost, but they'll be able to retain the memories from here on out. So that's, you know, it's a pretty good compromise. So you're not getting yourself back, you're getting a totally new person, but it's a person that you can go with forward. What happens to Max is her and her group that are traveling to New Orleans, they're in an RV. There's a woman named Ursula who's kind of the leader, and there's a set of twins, and there's a couple men, and they all begin losing their memories very, very quickly. And eventually Max does too. While they're driving, she keeps asking, like, where are we going? Who are you? How do I know you? She's losing the final strings of the memory. But the final thing that has not forgotten yet is Ori. And so she's still recording. She's still recording into her tape recorder her messages to Ori. And in those messages are memories, you know, like you're talking to a friend or writing a letter to a friend or a loved one. You're sort of sharing memories, like, remember that time, remember this. And the last we hear from Max herself, she's still in the RV, and she knows there's only seconds left before she'll be gone. And then that's the last we hear of her. But then we switch back to Ori, and the one who gathers has been referring to Ori this whole time by his last name, which is, I don't know how to pronounce it, like Hang. Please forgive me if that's not, it's like Zhang. And so that's how the one who gathers knew him, and he had never really had the chance or opportunity to get to know more about Ori because they're in a fight. They're trying to get the city set up and keep people who want to do them harm away. And then somebody refers to him as Ori, and the one who gathers is like, wait, you're Ori? And he's like, yes. He's like, I have your wife. And Ori's like, excuse me. And the one who gathers says, yes, I have Max. I was able to reattach her shadow. And what we find out happened is he was able to use the tape recorder that held her. He was able to use that item's shadow, project it onto the body, and then it absorbed what was on the tapes, and that was Max's memory. But what the one who gathers doesn't realize is that he didn't project it onto Max's body, because Max's body didn't make it. But he projected it onto Max's friend Ursula, who had been the driver of the RV. So Ursula looks like Ursula, but inside it's Max. And so, but the one who gathers doesn't know that's the case. He just thinks it's Max's body because, of course, he's never met her before. And then the moment comes when the one who gathers gets Ori and then brings Max in to see him. And Ori is just devastated. He's freaking out. He'd been so excited. And for whatever reason, he can't reconcile the fact that this body is not, while it's not Max's, inside is Max. He can't reconcile it. And he rejects her. And that's kind of how the book ends. Max goes out to, Max gives him his space and takes a job more so on the road. And the final bit is, back when Max first lost her shadow, they had this thing that had to do with their first date, and just to make sure they were both still remembering. And Ori would say, blue. And Max would respond with 52. And that was sort of like an inside joke from their first date that let them both know that they hadn't forgotten. So then fast forward to this final day, and we're reading sort of from Max's point of view how it all ends. And she said, after Ori rejected her, she just goes by M now, and she's taken a job in the city that will keep her away from him. And she says, there's something in me that would make him understand. She's like, if I said 52, maybe he would change his mind. And and realize it's me, truly me. And she said, but that's not something to be said. It's an answer to a question. And he hasn't asked the question. And it just kind of ends. In fact, I'll read the exact line. It's just a really sad ending. So here's how it's worded in the book. I told you everything you would wanted to know when we'd met. But there was one thing I didn't say to you and will never say because I can't. It's not something that can be said, only something that can come as an answer. And you would never ask me the question, but even if I never say it, it's still real. Because a thing does not have to be said to be real, it just has to be remembered. So I will remember it for myself, for you, and for Max. 52. And then that was the end. Just very sad ending. The one thing about this book that I don't quite understand is why he couldn't reconcile it. Why he couldn't. But he couldn't for whatever reason, you know, and we're never really told the reason. We're also never really told where the shadows are going, why, what happened, what started this. But that part I'm okay with because you don't really need to know, and it kind of just adds to the mystery. So yeah, but it broke my heart that he couldn't see past the body and realize it was Max inside. So anyway, that is the Book of M. Would highly recommend. I give it a good 4.5 out of 5 stars. So good. So if you've read it, let me know what you thought of it, and I will talk to you guys on Monday. Hope you have a good weekend. Bye guys.